I'm going to turn this screen just a wee little bit. I forgot we don't have a monitor at the back anymore for me to read the verses from. So I want to start today on a completely new topic. And the topic that I want to start today on is the idea of the spiritual world. Angels, demons, spiritual warfare, and all of that. And I want to start kind of with some statements, and then I want to ask you some questions. And today, to start in on this conversation, I kind of want us, or to start in this teaching, I want us to have a conversation. I'd like us to have some dialogue back and forth this morning, because I'd like us to pick up where we're at and move forward, and not relay too much foundation. But I also want us to get things right, kind of adjust our thinking a little bit around this subject. So I want to start with a few statements. Statement number one, I believe in God. I also believe in the devil. But when I say I believe in God, that is a completely different statement than when I say I believe in the devil, right? And Christians have somewhat of a mushy way of thinking about this sometimes, right? So they say, do you believe in God? Yes. Do you believe in the devil? Yes. Does that mean the same thing? No. What do I mean when I say I believe in God? Anybody got an idea for me? I trust him. He has all my trust and confidence, right? What else does it mean? Look on the negative side. When I say I believe in God, and it means I trust God, it also means there are certain things that are no longer true for me. Like what? Well, it depends on how you define religion. False doctrine, again, that can get into a big mushy box, right? It would be nice to spend some time exploring that side, but we won't go quite there right now, but I understand what you mean. So what he's saying is, in essence, superstition, right? But even that's kind of a squishy word, but we're going to nail some of that down in the midst of this study. What else does it mean? There are consequences to this. There are, absolutely. It means I don't trust in my own righteousness. It means I don't trust in the works of the law. When I express this, I believe in God, as a Christian, we use that as sort of shorthand notation for an immense amount of things, right? It doesn't help the lost when they hear us say, well, I believe in God. And what we mean by that is this whole host of things that go with it that we have a hard time explaining when I say, well, what does it mean? Well, it is kind of hard for us to go through that whole list of things. And I don't mean to go through that whole list of things in this study, although I think you should. Come to a list of, when I say, I believe in God, what does that mean? And part of it is I trust the Lord, but there is even more to it than that, isn't there? Right? When we say, I believe in Jesus Christ, again, there is more to it than just, I believe in. So when an atheist says, I believe in naturalism, and a Christian says, I believe in God, those two statements are actually closer in meaning than when a Christian says, I believe in God and I believe in Satan. And I'm laying this out there because I want us to understand that when we say these things, it would help us greatly if we could clean up the distinction between those statements. And so part of what I want to do in this study as we move forward from here is actually help us understand and establish for ourselves what we mean when we say, I believe in, okay? All right, so now I want to do a bit of a survey. And I want to ask you, how many of you would say, I believe in the devil? All right, I believe in demons. Okay, I believe in angels. I know exactly the difference between an angel and a cherub. I believe in cherubs. Okay? I don't believe they're fat babies with wings. Okay, good. All right. Just kind of getting some of that out of the way for us here. All right, so how many of you would say, I believe in spiritual warfare? Yeah? Good, I'm so glad you raised your hand. Everybody who raised your hand, tell me what that means. Okay, so he says that means there's more going on that we can't see with our physical eyes. And I would say, I'm going to put that in a slightly different way. See if you agree with this. I believe there is a reality behind the one we see. Okay, and that in that reality behind the one that we see, that spiritual reality, there are powers and players and things happening. You understand how much of a problem that is, right? Because once you make that statement, you open the door for a lot of imagination. A lot of people to imagine powers behind what they see. They see a traffic accident and they imagine powers behind it. They see a politician and they imagine powers behind that person. They see, and I see some smiles and raised eyebrows. How many of you would say I see that? Yeah? Go ahead, raise your hand, it's fine. Sort of, yeah, I sort of see that, right? I sort of see, right? Some people, and by the way, there are those who would look at us exactly the same way. There are those who would look at us and say, modern Christians just don't know the gods they worship. The things they worship came out of paganism, and modern Christians are being used by devils to lead people away from the truth. And in their mind, that is as settled a fact as Jesus Christ is in your mind. Isn't that odd? What would make us think that when we see them, we see bad doctrine, we see the devil? When they see us, they see bad doctrine, they see the devil. What would make us think we're right and they're wrong? Say, well, we have the Bible. Oddly, they do too. Strangely, they believe the Bible in a sense as well. And I'm bringing this out because I want you to understand that if you go out there right now, in fact, I don't like assigning homework because nobody ever does it. Right? I have no grade I can hold over your head and say, you didn't do your homework, you're flunking my class, right? No. But I would encourage you strongly to do a little bit of open-minded research. Go out there and read what Christian ministries put on their website concerning spiritual warfare, the devil, angels, and exorcism. And then go read what the Universalists put out there on their website concerning those very same topics. See what the New Age people say about those very same topics. And here's why I would say you might want to do this study. Strangely similar. What they write is oddly similar to what many Christian ministries write. Now, you might say, yeah, but they don't mean the same thing. I'm not sure about that. I'm really not. And I'm not here today to say, let's pick on all the people out there. That isn't my issue. My issue is to say that when we're thinking about this topic of demons and angels and powers and principalities and cherubs and all of that kind of stuff, and the devil and God, when we're thinking about all that, if you were the devil, it would behoove you to obfuscate that scene, right? To put as much fog and cloud in the way of that as possible, to make it very hard for people to figure out what's really going on with it. And here's the funny thing. This is not a new or fresh topic. This is an old topic. If you go out and search for devils and demons in the Bible, you will find references to devils and demons in the Bible, and then you will find references to devils and demons in Jewish history, some of it almost as old as the manuscripts we have for the Bible. You will find it in Babylonian history and in every culture almost around the world. You also find tiny people in almost every culture around the world. Did you know that? Elves and leprechauns and tiny woodland people exist in the mythology of almost every people everywhere around the world. Why do you think that's true? Anybody got an idea? Yeah, that would be true. That's why we keep you around, brother. Oh. That is not the case, clearly. Not for me, anyhow. Actually, I think there's a very good understanding for this. Human beings, our brain is a pattern recognition engine. It seeks for patterns of different types. And we understand cause and effect. In fact, we're one of the few creatures in the world who maintains a memory, a long-term memory of cause and effect. All creatures have some memory of it. That's why Pavlov's dog experiment works. When you ring the bell and give the dog food, the dog eventually gets to the point where you can ring the bell and the dog will begin to salivate, expecting the food, because he creates a cause and effect relationship in his mind between the sound of a bell and the presence of food. And human beings are that same way too. We see cause and effect a little bit longer, or on a little bit longer time scale than most other creatures in the world, but it's still oddly short. We still tie cause and effect on very short timelines, and we often mistake correlation with causation. That is, coincidence, things that tend to happen together, we tend to see as one causing the other. And so when we come across something that happens that seems random to us, we cannot see a temporally immediate cause for that effect, yet we recognize an effect, then we look for a cause for that effect that is not immediately apparent. Little people, demons, angels. Because there's an effect, our mind and all pure logic tells us there must be a cause for that effect to exist. And since we look for a cause right now in the near-term present for that effect, and we don't find an immediate cause, and it's very hard for our mind to conceive a cause very far back in time, distant causes for current effects, we naturally turn to naming a cause that we can't immediately see around us. Now, this is just a fact. It's just how our brains work. When we get sick, in fact, I've worked for more than one food establishment, and people often will blame food poisoning on the last meal they ate. Whatever the last meal was that they ate, if they get sick, that meal caused it. Oddly, that is almost never the case. It is not usually the last meal you ate because it takes between 7 and 12 hours for bacteria to reach the level of toxicity in your intestines, which means it probably wasn't the last meal you ate that made you sick. It was the one before that. But you look at your food constantly, you analyze your food constantly, and if something is a little off in a meal, your brain notes it. And then if you feel bad later, you name that thing as the cause of it. And you forgot the ones that you noted in the meal before that, because that meal didn't seem to make you sick. But it was most likely the one, whatever you ate 8 hours ago is probably what made you sick now. Not the meal you ate 45 minutes ago. It doesn't have the power to do that. You understand? And we're that way. We're entirely that way. Our brain thinks that way every single day. We see an effect in our life and we search for a cause for that effect. And in searching for the cause for that effect, we try to eliminate this and eliminate that and eliminate the other until we come to ourselves. And we think something like, in fact, I can guarantee you, if you want to see this in 3 dimensions, just watch the Super Bowl. Just look at the people in the stands at the Super Bowl. Last time my team won the Super Bowl, I was wearing this t-shirt. That was 23 years ago, and I still have that t-shirt, and I'm going to wear this t-shirt every time we go to the Super Bowl, so we win the Super Bowl. Sports fans are famous for this nonsense. And we laugh at them for it. There are some real sports stars who wear their same pair of underwear. If they've had a winning season last season, they'll wear that underwear through this entire season, trying to get another winning season out of that pair of underwear. Because it is so common for us to attempt to ascribe the effects to something temporally close to the effect. And if we can't find something that makes sense to us, we will pick anything and fetishes to follow a statue, a doll, just a few inches high. Not even an expensive doll, a few inches high. And follow it for days, seeking a miracle, someone to be healed, or some such thing, because there was a report that someone who followed that doll like that got the miracle that they wanted. And if enough people follow it, asking for a miracle, every single year, you will get some reports of people who followed that doll and got a miracle. Why? Because if you looked at it over time, you would say, hey, you know what? This percentage of people normally recover from these sicknesses in this period of time. And it's no different when people are following a doll down the street than when they aren't following a doll down the street. This same sort of thing leads a number of people to sue major corporations for children who have autism because that plant went in up there. This community didn't have very many children with autism. And then that plant went in over there, and suddenly, look at how many autistic children we have in the community. That's a big thing related to incidents in time in their mind. Never mind that we didn't have that many children in our community before they built the plant. And that when they built that plant, we moved a whole bunch of new families in. It had a whole bunch of new children in the community. And that the actual autism rate is not significantly outside the norm for anywhere else in the world. But in our minds, we see an effect, autism. We seek for a cause. What could the cause be? Well, look at there. Big plant they just put up over there. Must be the reason. Let's sue them. And you understand, when people get that in their head that way, it is very, very difficult. In fact, in my experience, there is zero chance of changing their mind with mathematics. I have had business leaders who believed they knew exactly how to make decisions to run their business because they made these decisions based upon these criteria before. They see those same criteria come up again. They're going to make that same decision that same way, even though those criteria upon which they made their decision have absolutely nothing to do with the outcome of that decision. The input is not related to the output at all. But you cannot convince them. I can build every simulation. I can show them every model. I can give them every logical explanation for why that input is not related to that output. Don't rely on that to make your decision. Rely on something else instead, and they will not. Somewhere on the order of 90% of all business decisions are made on what managers refer to as gut feel. Often looking at persuasive data that tells them that's not the right decision and making the decision that way anyhow, even though all the data tells them they're wrong. Why are we that way? Because as human beings, we're not accustomed to trusting math. We're not accustomed to trusting proof. We're accustomed to trusting cause and effect that we can see in a relatively short window of time. That whole little bit of that discussion there is to lay the foundation for what we have to talk about. And I want you to understand that a huge part, not a small, I'm not talking about like 10% of the American population or 15% of the American population. Why do you think newspapers ran a horoscope for decades in America? Because, you know, they have this extra space in the newspaper, they need to put something in that space. No, ink is valuable. Space in the paper they sell at like $100 per column inch. And here they're taking up 12 column inches for a horoscope that nobody's paid for. Nobody came to them and said, you know what, I'm really good I am a really good astrologer. I am so good an astrologer that I'll make a lot of money if I put a horoscope in your newspaper. No, they don't even care what the horoscope says. They put it in there because people buy the paper so they can read their daily horoscope. And why do they want to read their daily horoscope? Because they need some confirmation that this cause and effect relationship that they have in their mind is somehow comforting to them. It somehow controls things in their life. And I want to tell you this in clear, almost forceful terms. It is possible to be a Christian and still be superstitious. Still have this idea somehow that there are these forces controlling your life, stars and planets, angels and demons, somehow controlling your life, moving things around when you're not looking. Who was it who put that one out on Facebook this week? It was so funny. That one that said, I like to mess with my husband. Who was it? Was it you? Was it? Yeah, there you go. That's right. I like to mess with my husband. I move things around and put them where he can't find them. Like to put his socks in the sock drawer, and I put his shoes in the closet, and I hang his keys on the hook, right? He's never going to find him then. He's going to say, who keeps moving my stuff around, right? That's why Mike doesn't let anybody clean his garage, his workshop. He will never find his tools, right? Do not come in and clean my workshop. Don't do it, right? It's not right for you to do it that way. In fact, if you use his tool, leave it out in the open so he can put it where he wants it in the end, because it's not good for you to put it away. You think you know where it goes, but you'll get it wrong, and then you'll be frustrated. Look, we are that way as humans. And there are a lot of Christians who have a view of spiritual warfare that I would actually classify as superstition. There's also the other danger on the other end of it. And we don't recognize that there is a devil and that there is a world beyond what we see, etc. Okay. So then, we've established the following. We believe in the devil, but when we say that, we don't mean the same thing as when we say we believe in Jesus Christ. And if we pin down the difference between I believe in the devil and I believe in Jesus Christ, it's really hard for us to describe the difference in those two statements, even though intrinsically we all understand that there's a difference between them. We have also established that when we look out at the world today, we are not significantly different than anybody else in the world. There's a whole bunch of people out there in the world. Probably, I'm guessing, I think it's upward of 80%. There's no clear way to tell. But I'm guessing it's upward of 80, maybe even upward of 90% of Americans believe in some spiritual reality separate from the physical reality, and would probably describe themselves as being spiritual. Many even describing themselves as being very spiritual. Right? So they don't just say, yeah, I kind of believe those things that might be true. They actually believe them to the point where they can describe it in some way to you. And in that sense, we have a hard time communicating the gospel. So do I. Okay, but do you believe in the devil? Yeah, of course. But God for them has a completely different meaning than it does for you. Believe in for them has a completely different meaning than it does for you. I hope. And what the devil is has a completely different meaning. Look at Mormonism. When a Mormon says, I believe in the devil or Satan, what does he mean by that? Or he or she? Any idea? The brother of Jesus Christ. They believe Jesus and Satan were brothers in time past. And in fact, that they actually both have a viable mission in the world today. They don't see one as polar opposite of the other. They see them both as having a viable mission in the world today. So when you speak to them of these things, you can use exactly the same terminology, mean something very different. That said, I think we should do now a little survey of the scriptures. What do the scriptures say about these things? And what can we get from what the scriptures actually say? Okay, so let's go to Genesis chapter 3. We're going to begin in the above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between the woman and between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Now there's a lot in there. And when we sitting on this side of Calvary look at that verse, what do we see? We see the death of Christ. We see Jesus being the seed of the woman, referred to with a male pronoun, his. And we also see Satan being defeated at Calvary. I just want you to know that when, for all of time past until Calvary, that was not very clear to people. If they believed it might have had something to do with the Messiah, it was very ill-defined what it had to do with the Messiah. And I think that's a very important observation to make at this point. And here's why. Because we have a lot of people who think now on this side of Calvary, they understand everything about that spiritual world over there, and they're able to tell you that, what it is, teach you about it. And I'm not sure our understanding of that world is significantly better today than it was then. And I think I can show you as we move through the scriptures. We make a lot of application and assumption, some of which is warranted in the scriptures, some of which is not. Okay, let's go to Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 14. When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abomination of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or daughter pass through the fire, or that useth divination. Tell me about divination. How does that show up in today's world? What's that? Psychics, palm readers, tarot cards, water witching. All of that is a form of divination. There shall not be any of those. Or an observer of times. What is that? What's that? Horoscopes, would you say? I'm sorry? Astrologers? Yeah, I get it. I get them mixed up all the time too. Astrologers, horoscope, not only that, but those who would make predictions about what's to come in the future of any sort, right? Who are looking out and trying to give you signs of the times. Or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits. What would that show up like in today's world? Familiars. They actually call them familiars, believe it or not. They actually call them familiars. They are oftentimes an animal that operates as your familiar, or some sort of a chimera, form of an animal spirit that operates as your spirit. You saw it in cartoons a number of years ago as, the spirit of the bear. And, calling on the spirit of the cougar to be able to run fast and all of that kind of stuff. And that is exactly that same sort of thing. Or a wizard, or a necromancer. What is a necromancer? Just anyone who talks to the dead. We had an entire show on that with Courtney Love, right? On TV. I want you to know that this is not either unfamiliar or unusual in the world today. Now, you as a Christian probably seek, we all do, we seek for those who are like ourselves. And when we go to work somewhere, we find a lot of people who sort of agree with us on these things. And if we're at all somewhat convincing in our discussion with people, we'll end up surrounding ourselves by people who believe very close to what we believe and don't believe this, and then we get a sense of the world that the world is like us, right? There's a form of active confirmation bias that keeps occurring in our life, and we keep seeing that most Americans are more like me than that, but in fact, most Americans are more like this than like us. I sat in a meeting a number of years ago with an innovation group who was attempting to identify potentially profitable concepts that we could patent and use in business. And one of the concepts they came up with was doing away with all coupons. You would not need to clip coupons or have coupons on your phone anymore. Instead, the grocery store would present you with these discounted options based upon who you are and what your preferences are. And when I brought up, how are they going to know that? The answer was, We need to have a definitive way to identify you as an individual in the world in order to be able to market to you in this way. And I said, okay, well, how are we going to do that? Fingerprints don't work. And I don't want to give you my fingerprint every time I come into the store. And my retinal scan only works if I stand still for a little while and stare at the light. And I don't want to do that every time I come into the store. So how are we going to do this? Near field communication, NFC. We're going to embed in your skin a chip that will identify you when you come in, and you're going to want to have that chip. Because if you have that chip, you get discounts nobody else gets. Everybody's going to sign up for it because everybody wants those discounts. And I said, I have a hard time believing Americans are going to sign up for that because of the sign of the beast. And I'm sitting in a room with 12 highly educated Americans. And they looked at me and said, what do you mean, the sign of the beast? They had no idea what it meant. In fact, most Americans don't anymore. Most Americans know more about people who speak to the dead than they do about what the Bible says about the sign of the beast. It's important for you to know what world you're living in. Okay. Let's go to the next, let's see. Let's go to the next verse, 13. Thou shalt be perfect with the Lord thy God, verse 14. For these did not want his people messing with that stuff. Okay, Isaiah 14, verses 4 through 15. Now, I'm going to go through this. I'm just going to hit the beginning part of this. I think most of you are familiar with this passage. If you're not, then go home and read the rest of Isaiah 14 on your own. I'm really just going to cover the first couple of verses here. The first one is, thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how has the oppressor ceased, the golden city ceased. Now, the reason that I bring that up is because what do we normally ascribe this passage to? Who do we say this passage is talking about? No. Not Rome. The devil. We normally ascribe this to speaking about the devil. The Lord hath broken, thou shalt take up this proverb, verse 5. And the Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. Keep going. He smote the people with wrath and continual stroke, and he ruled the nation. He that ruled the nations in anger is persecuted and none hindered. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. Yea, the fir trees rejoice, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. Hell from beneath is moved to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth, and hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. Keep going. They shall seek, all they that speak and say unto thee, art thou become weak unto us? Art thou become like unto us? Keep going. Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials. The worm is spread over thee. The worms cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of morning? Obviously, he's talking about the devil. In the form of the king of Babylon. And we know this because he refers to him as Lucifer. Now let's assume for a minute that that's not true. Let's take the argument. I want to argue from the side that says this is not actually talking about the devil. And I want to argue that because I have friends who are philosophers and atheists who say that is not talking about the devil. And if you think it is, you really don't know history. And in a manner of speaking, they're right. How come? Does anybody know history well enough to tell me why that is not talking about the devil? Yes. Give me more. That's right. And that was part of Babylonian mythology. And he was likened to the king of Babylon. The king of Babylon was the human representation of the morning star that preceded the rising of the sun and stayed in the sky as the sun began to rise. It was the bearer, the bringer of the light of day in Babylonian mythology. And the king of Babylon was said to be the representative of that morning star in their religion. And I just, as a slight side note, I'm going to step over here to the side. I just want to say, as a slight side note, it has always been the case through most of human history that nations have a hard time separating between the religion that can motivate them to go to war and kill people and the government that rules them. Right? That's why politicians use religion. That doesn't mean all the wars in history are the result of Christianity or the result of religion, and therefore you should be atheist. It means that if you really want people to go to war and become angry and violent and kill other men, the easiest way to persuade them to do that is through their religious motivations. And so politicians have always sought to align themselves with God of whatever religion that was at the time. And so the king of Babylon literally was known as Lucifer, the bearer of the light, the morning star that led forth the sun in Babylonian religion. So when he takes up this proverb against the king of Babylon, Babylon at the time is preparing to become, this is a prophecy, is preparing to become that great spreading tree that we see in Daniel, that overtakes all the known nations of the world, even parts of Egypt, rules over the world with great wealth, and in fact, most of the world experiences a time of peace and wealth under Babylon. Although their governments are not allowed to become powerful. Their governments are knocked down and kept in subservience under Babylon, but the nations experience wealth and peace. Peace through power. And this is a prophecy, a proverb taken up against the king of Babylon, the literal king of Babylon. And when we take this passage and we say, see here, here's what happened. He's prophesying against the king of Babylon, but really he's telling you the story of what happened to the devil. My response to that is, it doesn't entirely fit. Because if what we see about the devil in Scripture elsewhere is true, then hell was created for the devil and his angels. And when this prophecy occurs, hell is moved, and there are already people in hell. Already kings and nations in hell. When this one named Lucifer is cast down into hell, and they cover him. And the implication there is in violence and disgust, they cover him. Whereas if it was really the story of the devil, there would have been no people in hell at the time. So you have no idea how many, go look. How many of you have had this passage taught? This teaches us about Satan. Sure you have. But it actually isn't. It would be a possible post type, if you will. In other words, this prophecy of the king of Babylon is a type of Satan that came after what actually happened to Satan. And he sort of suffers the same fate as his father, so to speak. We could say it that way. But to say that this actually teaches us about Satan just is off. Right? It just ignores history. And it doesn't really understand the passage. And the passage, I think, is what it portrays itself to be. It portrays itself to be one in a series of prophecies against kings. Real human kings on the earth, and he's going after them one at a time, and God is telling you what's going to happen to those kings and their kingdoms. as he goes through it. And this is the king of Babylon, only one out of a bunch of, read the chapters around it, you'll see what I mean. It's one out of a bunch of prophecies against living kings, and this is a living king, not Satan. And he refers to himself as Lucifer for a reason, right? The bearer, the bringer forth of the sun. Okay, Isaiah 27, verse 1. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. We only run across the Leviathan in one other place in Scripture. Does anybody know where that is? Job, the book of Job. That's correct. Is this Satan? It could be in type, but you're making it a type then. In reality, he's still talking about Babylon. And you have to understand something about the mythology of the nations around him, and what God is actually doing here is attacking the heart of their pagan beliefs and saying, the one that you believe in, that you claim to be, I am going to destroy that one. I'm going to take him down. And I'm going to do it in a naval battle in the sea. And he does. A storm overtakes them and sinks an entire armada as a result of this prophecy. And their boats with the serpent logo go down in the sea. And he punishes them in the sea. Their claim is that they pierce through the very ocean itself by the power of their might. And they come against any nation, and no nation can stand against the power of their armada. And God says, no, that is a crooked serpent. It does not have the power to pierce, and I'm going to take them down right where they're at. And he describes it in this term. Now, if you put all the passages that we're going to cover, and I counsel you to go look these up yourself, if you took it out of your I know who the devil is and I know how all this works, if you set all that aside for a second, actually looked at the text and some of the history that goes with the text, who he was actually writing to, it matters who he was writing it to. He wasn't writing it to you. And it matters who he was writing it to. And when you look at it in its context, he is not actually talking about the devil here at all. He's actually talking about a nation, and that he's going to destroy that nation. Because they trust in their own might, and he's going to destroy their own trust in their own power. And I think it does a great injustice to pick these passages out. Now, it doesn't mean the Bible doesn't teach us about the devil. It doesn't mean the Bible doesn't teach us about demons. We're going to find out it does. It just means that a lot of the stuff that people have put forward as things referring to the devil and the demons actually aren't those things. They may apply in some figure, but only in some figure. The actual passage doesn't teach that. And I'm just covering some as we move forward in this. And I was just going in biblical order, and I say, why don't you try doing that? Looking these things up in order and see what they mean. And today we didn't get far. We'll get a little further next week. Okay, thank you for being here.